They were exposed, grieving, and the world expected them to collapse. Then God acted. Picture a scene that sounds almost cinematic. Some traditions imagine a fierce contest in the heavens over the body of Moses. The people below stand stunned on the banks of the Jordan. The leader who had guided them out of Egypt, who had stood on Sinai and received the law, was now gone. What happens the moment the greatest leader dies? Within days, the biblical record shows 7 astonishing moves, swift, precise, theologically loaded, that changed everything for Israel. In this message, we'll trace those 7 events, anchored in Scripture, and listen for what they mean for leaders and for those who stand at the edge of their own Jordans. If you want more deep Bible studies like this, press like and subscribe. There will be more careful exegesis and practical application ahead. First, authority is transferred. The story does not leave a vacuum. After Moses' death, recorded in Deuteronomy 34, the narrative immediately turns to Joshua. The Lord speaks to Joshua with clarity and command. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan." Joshua 1:1-2. Those opening lines are striking for their economy. In a few sober words, God dissolves the paralysis that grief could cause. Then comes the repeated charge, "Be strong and courageous." Joshua 1:6-9. This repetition is not a slogan. It is a theological scaffolding. God's promise, "I will not leave you nor forsake you," Joshua 1:5, is given to sustain a leader who inherits not only authority, but responsibility for a people still raw from loss. The implication is clear. Leadership in God's economy is not a private mantle to be hoarded. It is a public trust that God sometimes transfers in an instant. That transfer is divine and decisive, not merely human politicking. For those who lead today, this first act invites a sober confidence. Authority is real when it is rooted in God's commissioning, and it carries accountability. For those who follow, it asks a simple question. Will you recognize God's voice when the next leader stands before you? Second, momentum is manufactured. Joshua's first public move is practical and urgent. He tells the people to prepare provisions, for within 3 days they will cross the Jordan. Joshua 1:11. That 3-day countdown is not bureaucratic planning. It is a divine deadline that forces movement. Think about a nation still in ritual mourning. Mourning lasts 30 days, Deuteronomy 34:8, and communal grief can immobilize. Yet God creates a timeline that compresses fear into action. Obedience here is not leisurely piety. It is disciplined preparation under pressure. This pattern is instructive. God's deadlines often look impossible until you take the first obedient step. The 3-day command turns scattered fear into disciplined momentum. It gives a people who could have waited forever a reason to act now. For us, when the horizon seems blocked by grief, failure, or a leader's absence, the call is not merely to wait for feelings to catch up. It is to prepare, to move with what obedience you have, trusting that momentum itself is a form of faith. Third, intelligence and unexpected redemption appear. Before the crossing, Joshua sends 2 men to do reconnaissance. Joshua 2. They enter Jericho, find lodging in the house of a woman named Rahab, and hear something that quickens hope. The inhabitants of Jericho already fear the God of Israel. Rahab's confession, "The Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath," Joshua 2:11, is a startling admission from a Canaanite. She covers the spies with a scarlet cord, pledging protection for her household. There is so much packed into this episode. The scarlet cord is an arresting image. Many interpreters see a Passover echo, a token of protection, a sign that God can work through the margins, through someone outside covenant Israel. Rahab's faith unsettles neat boundaries. A woman in a Canaanite house becomes an agent in Israel's deliverance. God's kingdom trajectory includes outsiders, and sometimes the ones the world dismisses are the very carriers of salvation. Practically, this scene warns us against tribalism and invites us to watch for God's work in unexpected places. Fourth, God displays power publicly. The crossing of the Jordan is not a quiet miracle. The army of priests lifts the ark and steps into flood stage currents. The waters upstream pile up, the waters standing and rising up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaretan, Joshua 3:16, and the people cross on dry ground, Joshua 3:4. This is a seismic, public demonstration. Canaanite kings watch and panic. Joshua 5:1 records that the news of the crossing reached the kings, and fear spread among the inhabitants of the land. The crossing is more than logistics. It is psychological and theological warfare. The miracle exposes the impotence of human defenses and declares that God is the decisive actor. The priest's role also shows that the sacred mediates the miracle. The ark, carried by consecrated priests, is central. When the people see the waters held back and their feet on dry soil, the message is unmistakable. The God who brought Israel out of Egypt is with them now in conquest. Yet we must say this carefully. This is not a formula that guarantees victory any time leaders act bravely. Scripture narrates this event as a unique act of God in history, a public sign given at a crucial hinge. Fifth, memory is institutionalized. After the crossing, Joshua commands 12 men, one from each tribe, to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan and set them on the bank where the priests stood, Joshua 4:3-8. Another 12 stones are set as a visible memorial on the west bank, while the ones taken from the riverbed lie beneath the surface. This twofold memorial, visible stones and hidden stones, teaches two linked truths about divine remembrance. The visible stones are pedagogical. They are meant to provoke questions in future generations. Why these stones? The answer is a historical testimony. Here the Lord dried up the Jordan. The hidden stones, the ones left under the water, are a theological claim about secret faithfulness. God remembers what is hidden, and acts in ways both public and concealed. There is a pastoral tenderness here. Not every righteous act will be broadcast. Not every obedience will be posted for applause. Some of what God honors is unseen, preserved beneath the surface. The memorials are a covenantal memory project, an insistence that the people remember both the spectacle and the deeper fidelity that made it possible. Sixth, dependence is reframed. The manna, mysterious bread from heaven that sustained the Israelites in the wilderness, ceases after they eat the produce of the land for the first time, Joshua 5:12. That daily miracle had been a formative dependence. Now standing in the land, the people must transition from receiving daily sustenance to cultivating, harvesting, and stewarding land. The end of manna is not punishment. It is maturation. This is a vital theological shift. Much of spiritual life happens in the wilderness, times of miraculous provision that teach dependence on God. Yet arrival in the promised land invites a different posture, partnership and labor. Receiving grace does not negate work. Often it calls forth new responsibilities. For leaders, the end of manna is a reminder that seasons have different chores. One stage of life may require prayerful dependence. The next requires initiative and stewardship, still under God but with earthly means and effort. The cessation of the manna is a divine signal that spiritual growth often includes new practical demands. Seventh, sovereignty is restated in a startling encounter. As Joshua prepares for Jericho, he meets a figure described as a man standing before him with his sword drawn, Joshua 5:13. Joshua asks, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" The answer reframes the entire enterprise. "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord," Joshua 5:14. Joshua falls on his face and worships, and is told to remove his sandals, echoing the burning bush, Exodus 3:5. This scene is electrifying and difficult. What exactly is this commander? Scripture presents him ambiguously. Some read this as an angelic being, an exalted messenger, while others see a theophany, a visible manifestation of the divine presence. Many scholars note this ambiguity and caution against firm doctrinal claims. One plausible reading is, or the text allows for. Jude 9 and later Jewish traditions even discuss a heavenly dispute over Moses' body. Such traditions should be handled cautiously, noting their interpretive character. Whatever the precise identification, the theological point is unambiguous. Israel does not command the heavens. The heavenly host commands the campaign. Joshua's posture, worship, humility, the removal of sandals, reminds us that human leaders are participants, not ultimate authors of divine missions. Heaven initiates, Israel joins. If we step back now and cluster these 7 acts, a pattern emerges. The first 3, God's commissioning of Joshua, the 3-day deadline, and the intelligence mission that brought Rahab and the scarlet cord, form a cluster we could call authority. They settle the question, who's in charge and how does God begin a new phase of leadership? The 4th and 5th, the Jordan miracle and the memorial stones, glitter with power, public vindication and the crafting of memory that will shape identity. The 6th and 7th, the end of manna and the encounter with the commander, carry transition. A people move from dependence to stewardship, from earthly leadership to partnership with heaven's army. This is not a tidy switch from law to grace or from one theology to another, in simplistic terms. But there is a clear typological rhythm. Moses and the wilderness period formed the people through law, wandering, and supernatural provision. Joshua and the conquest period moved them into possession, cultivation, and participatory warfare. For Christian readers, many have seen in Joshua a type of the Christ who leads into rest and victory. Yet this is typology, an interpretive lens, not a claim the text makes directly. Use such typology to illumine, not to replace, the plain reading of Israel's history. There are pastoral cautions here. First, the quickness of God's action after Moses' death does not demean mourning. Deuteronomy records that the people grieved for 30 days for Moses, Deuteronomy 34:8. Scripture honors grief. What it refuses is paralysis. God's timing sometimes accelerates events in ways that can discomfort our emotions, but that does not make grief wrong. It makes obedience required. Second, when reading scenes that touch on angelic beings or possible theophanies, we must avoid turning attention into angel worship. Joshua's worship is directed toward God in response to a theophanic figure. The Bible consistently forbids the worship of created beings. See, for example, Revelation 19:10 and 22:8-9's corrective posture. So we applaud Joshua's humility and do not theologicalize the figure beyond what the text allows. Now, practical application. The narrative asks us a pointed question. What Jordan stands before you? For some, the Jordan may be a literal crisis, loss of a spouse, the end of a ministry, the sudden absence of a mentor. For others, it is a decision that requires public witness, joining a difficult initiative, leaving a comfort zone, speaking truth into a toxic situation. The story invites several concrete moves. First, pay attention to authority that comes from God, not mere charisma. When a new leader rises, watch for the marks Joshua received. God's clear commissioning and the provision of divine promise. Evaluate leadership by fidelity to scriptural norms, and by the ways it calls the community to faithful obedience, not by personal magnetism alone. Second, embrace momentum. If God gives a deadline, explicitly or by circumstance, don't let fear turn it into an excuse for delay. Momentum is faith in action. Prepare what you can. Trust that God's timeline is often designed to prod obedience into motion. Third, notice where God is at work among outsiders. Rahab reminds the church that faith can appear in surprising forms. Be quick to extend mercy and to listen to testimonies that disrupt expectations. Fourth, bear witness that public acts of God serve communal purposes. When God acts in the open, it is to instruct, convict, and call. Celebrate communal testimonies and use memorials, stories, testimonies, gratitude rituals, to pass on faith to the next generation. Fifth, receive the end of a provision as a call to new responsibility. If a season of dependence has closed, ask what stewardship God now calls you to. Growth frequently includes labor. Sixth, posture yourself before the commander. Worship is the right answer when you discover the sovereignty of God at work. But worship should be God-directed and humble, paired with the healthy refusal to deify intermediaries. Know that the campaign belongs to the Lord. Your courage is a response to divine initiative. Lastly, do not mistake the story's dramatic elements for a guaranteed formula, that obedience leads to instant prosperity or healing. Scripture narrates an historical sequence, the miraculous crossing, the sudden fear of the kings, but it does not promise a universal, repeatable formula. Obedience is faithful. Outcomes remain in God's sovereign hands. Before we close, a brief word on contested traditions. The image of a battle over Moses' corpse is not explicit in the Pentateuch. Jude 9 references Michael disputing with the devil about Moses' body, a passage that has given rise to interpretive speculation in later traditions. Mention it as a scholarly aside, not as a theological anchor. Many interpreters caution against building doctrine on such material. Keep the focus on the canonical narrative, Deuteronomy and Joshua, which supplies the sequence of events we've traced. So, what are the 7 unbelievable things that happened right after Moses' death? They are, in order and grounded in Scripture: God's immediate commissioning of Joshua, Joshua 1:1-9, Joshua's 3-day countdown and call to prepare, Joshua 1:10-11, the reconnaissance and Rahab's faith, Joshua 2, the public miracle at the Jordan with priests and ark, Joshua 3:4, the twin memorial stones that teach visible and hidden remembrance, Joshua 4, the cessation of the manna as the people begin to eat the land, Joshua 5:12, and the appearance of the commander of the Lord's army. Reframing Israel's role in the divine campaign, Joshua 5:13-15. Grouped into authority, power, and transition, these acts together show that Moses' death is not the end of God's plan, but its hinge. If you are standing before your own Jordan today, take one small obedient step. Prepare your provisions, prayer, practical planning, community support, within whatever timeline God has given you. Ask, are you listening for God's commissioning? Are you willing to step into momentum even when grief or fear says stand still? Are you ready to give thanks for what once sustained you, and to do the labor that the new season demands? Which Jordan are you facing? Leave one sentence in the comments naming the barrier you see ahead. And if this message helped you, share it with someone who needs to hear that God moves even in the wake of loss. If you want to go deeper, I invite you to watch the follow-up study on the walls of Jericho, where we'll unpack how these 7 acts move toward the climactic conquest, and what that means for courage and community. Go in peace, be strong and courageous, and remember, the campaign belongs to the Lord.